Torek Vassin had been stationed at the human quarantine perimeter for 6 years, and in that time he had confiscated 11 crates of something called hot sauce, 47 data chips containing human entertainment media, and 1 live chicken that nobody on either side of the border could explain. It was, by any measure, the most boring post in the Torogen military. He liked it. His bones were old. 3 centuries of service had ground his joints into something that clicked when it rained. And it always rained on Perimeter Station 9, because the atmospheric recyclers had been broken since before he arrived, and nobody cared enough to fix them. He sat at his inspection desk, cataloged contraband, and listened to the hum of a station that the galaxy had forgotten. The humans were not supposed to be interesting. The conclave of elder species had classified them as Tier 9 primitive 300 years ago, which was the polite way of saying they were too dumb to be dangerous and too alive to ignore. They got 1 embassy station on the fringe. They got trade permits for basic goods. They got watched. Torek did the watching. He was good at it because he did not hate them the way some officers did, and he did not pity them the way the Vreth diplomats did. He simply found them strange in a way that kept his old brain from going numb. They smuggled seasoning spices with the same desperate ingenuity that the Drexy had once used to smuggle weapons. They named their ships ridiculous things. They argued with each other constantly, even when they agreed. He had, in a drawer he told no one about, 7 data chips of their music. The cello. That was the one that got him. An instrument made of dead wood and animal gut that produced sounds his species had never imagined in 300,000 years of civilization. He played the chips on a modified translator unit with the door locked and the lights off, and he told himself it was intelligence gathering. It was a Tuesday, or the human equivalent, which the station calendar tracked, because the humans threw fits if you scheduled inspections on their weekends. When the cargo frigate Duct Tape Diplomacy requested docking clearance. Torek looked at the name on his screen, sighed. Humans named their ships the way they named their children, with either too much hope or too much irony, and you could never tell which. The ship was ugly. Not damaged ugly, designed ugly. It looked like someone had welded together 3 different vessels from 3 different centuries, and then spray-painted the seams. It moved through space, with the aerodynamic grace of a thrown brick. He boarded with 2 junior officers, who immediately began sneezing. Humans used cleaning chemicals that attacked Torogen's sinuses like tiny, lemon-scented knives. The captain was a short woman with dark hair pulled into a knot that looked like it was losing a war with gravity. She smiled too much. Humans always smiled too much. It meant everything and nothing at the same time. Cargo manifest, Torek said. She handed him a tablet. He scanned it. Standard goods. Textile samples. Cultural exchange materials, which was the legal term for the movies and music humans sold on the black market across half the quadrant. Anything to declare beyond manifest? Nope. Still smiling. He didn't believe her. He never believed them. But the cargo hold matched the manifest, and the crew quarters were clean. And he was about to sign off and go back to his desk when one of his junior officers called from the engine bay. "Sir, you should see this." Torek had heard that phrase 900 times in his career. It usually preceded something mildly annoying. A smuggling compartment, an unlicensed modification. Once, memorably, a pet that had gotten into the wiring and fused itself to the navigation array. He walked into the engine bay. He stopped walking. The engine was wrong. Not wrong the way engines broke. Wrong the way reality broke. He was looking at a drive system that the Conclave's own physicists had published papers about 17 years ago, declaring it theoretically interesting and practically impossible. The kind of technology that would have required a Sorvani crystal lattice computing array the size of a small moon to calculate the field harmonics alone. The humans had built it into a space roughly the size of a closet. Half of it appeared to be made from repurposed water heating equipment. There was a sticker on the casing. It said, "Do not kick. Seriously this time, Marcus." Torex stood in front of it for a long time. The captain appeared behind him, still smiling, but different now. A smile that knew it was standing next to a bomb. "It's experimental," she said. "University project out of Sao Paulo. The kids needed a test bed, and my ship was available." A university project. Grad students. They're very motivated. Torex junior officers were staring at him, waiting for the order they'd been trained to give. Confiscate. Report. Flag the species for technological regression review under protocol standing orders. It was law. It was the thing that kept the galaxy from tearing itself open, the way the Keth had torn it open 11,000 years ago. When they built something they couldn't control and erased 3 star systems from existence. He looked at the engine. The sticker, "Do not kick." Grad students. He filed a Class 7 anomaly report that night. He recommended increased surveillance of human trade vessels. He described the engine in full technical detail, holding nothing back. He did not recommend confiscation. He did not flag Earth for regression review. He told himself it was because the paperwork would take months. He did not open the drawer with the music chips. He sat at his desk in the broken rain of Perimeter Station 9 and listened to the hum of the recyclers and tried to name the thing that was sitting in his chest like a stone. He couldn't. 3 days later, on the Conclave homeworld, a Vreth senior clerk named Fesic received the anomaly report. She was 400 years old. She had processed 9 million documents in her career. She read Torex technical specifications, cross-referenced them against the Forbidden Innovation Index, the master list of technologies no species was permitted to develop, and found 4 matches. 4. From a single engine, built by children. Fesic had never sent a direct communication to the High Conclave Chamber. In 400 years, she had never needed to. She composed the message with all 4 of her hands, which meant it was important enough that her body had decided eating and filing could wait. The message was 2 words. They're iterating. The High Conclave received it during a routine session on agricultural tariffs. The agricultural tariffs were never finished. 12,000 years of galactic governance shifted on its axis, and it started with a sticker on a water heater that said, "Do not kick." Sene Kauth had 4 arms, and every single one of them wanted to be somewhere else. The shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere like a stone dropped into soup, thick, wet, aggressively blue, and Sene pressed all 4 hands against the viewport and tried to understand how an entire species had evolved on a planet that was 70% trying to drown them. She was Vreth, insectoid, 4 arms, compound eyes, an exoskeleton the color of burnt copper. Her people had built the Conclave's archives, its filing systems, its institutional memory. 8,000 years of cataloging every thought the galaxy had ever had. The Vreth did not create. They organized, and they were very, very good at it. Being assigned to the Human Monitoring Task Force was not, in Sene's view, a promotion. It was the bureaucratic equivalent of being told to go count sand on a beach. The humans were Tier 9. They were a clerical footnote. The anomaly report about their engine was probably a misclassification. Taurogen military officers were not known for their technical precision, and the one who filed it had been stationed on a broken perimeter station for 6 years. She expected to spend 3 weeks on Earth, confirm the humans were still primitive, file a recommendation for mildly increased monitoring, and return to her actual career. She was wrong about all of it. The delegation landed in a human city called Mumbai, and Sene's compound eyes, designed to process information from 300 angles simultaneously, nearly shut down from the input. Nothing was optimized. That was the first thing. On every conclave world, cities were planned, traffic flowed, sound was managed, space was allocated by function. Mumbai was a place where a temple and a technology company and a street vendor selling fried dough existed on the same block, producing a combined sensory output that registered on Sen's neural processors as a polite form of screaming. People were everywhere, not just humans, though there were so many humans, packed so densely, moving so fast, talking at volumes that suggested they believed the person next to them was on a different planet. Animals too. Dogs, cats, birds that had no fear. A cow standing in traffic with the calm authority of someone who had been there first and intended to stay. Sen hated it. She could not stop looking. The delegation, 4 Vreth analysts, 2 Sorvani scientific observers, and 1 Torojan security officer who kept sneezing, was given a tour of human research institutions. This was where the trip went from confusing to terrifying. The first facility was a university, not a military laboratory. A school, full of children. Well, not children, young adults, the humans corrected, but to Sen's eyes, they were barely formed, soft-shelled, loud, dressed in clothing that appeared to be chosen by a random number generator. One of them, a girl of perhaps 19 years with dark hair and eyebrows that moved independently of each other, was giving a presentation on zero-point energy extraction. Zero-point energy, the theoretical harvest of quantum vacuum fluctuations. 3 elder species had attempted it. The Sorvani had spent 400 years on it and produced a paper titled On the Fundamental Impossibility of Practical Zero-Point Extraction. It was considered the definitive last word. This girl, her name tag said Maytan Voss, had not read that paper, or if she had, she hadn't cared. She stood in front of a holographic display she'd clearly built herself, because it flickered every 30 seconds, and explained her working prototype using cartoon animations of dancing electrons. The Sorvani observers went very still. In Sorvani body language, this meant the same thing as a human screaming at the top of their lungs. How, one of them managed. May pushed her hair out of her face. So basically, the Sorvani approach assumed you needed to stabilize the vacuum state before extraction, right? But what if you just don't? What if you let it be unstable and build the extraction process around the instability instead of against it? She said this the way a human might explain a recipe for toast. The delegation visited 3 more facilities that day. At each one, they found something that should not have existed. Self-replicating construction drones, invented for a competition between universities, the way humans might compete at sports. A communication network that processed data through biological synthetic hybrid nodes, faster than anything the conclave operated. Medical nanites that could identify and repair cellular damage at a speed that made Vreth medical technology look like archaeology. None of it was secret. None of it was military. The humans had put most of it on something called YouTube, which Seni eventually understood was a public platform where humans shared knowledge, entertainment, arguments, and videos of cats falling off tables, all with equal enthusiasm and zero quality control. That night, the delegation met in their quarters to discuss findings. The room was quiet, the way rooms are quiet before a verdict. Protocol Keth 9, said Vren, the senior analyst. She did not say it like a question. Seni knew what Keth 9 meant. Forced technological regression. The confiscation of all research above the permitted threshold. Monitoring implants in every institution. And if the species resisted, the Drexy option. She'd read about the Drexy in the archives. They were 12 lines in a file. 12 lines for an entire civilization. The vote went around the room. Yes, 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 yes. Seni. She looked at her hands, all 4 of them. One was holding a tablet with the day's notes. One was gripping the edge of the table. One was still, resting on her knee. The fourth was doing something she didn't recognize, tracing a small circle on the fabric of her uniform, over and over, a gesture that had no entry in any Vreth behavioral archive. I abstain. The room recalculated. You cannot abstain from a Keth-9 recommendation, Vren said. I just did. On what grounds? Seni didn't answer right away. She reached into the pocket of her uniform and pulled out a data chip, small, battered, with a scratch across its surface. She had found it in the confiscated items log from Perimeter Station 9, filed under Cultural Contraband, Human, Musical. It had been tagged by an officer named Torek Vasson. She placed the chip in the room's audio system and pressed play. A cello, solo. The sound filled the room like water filling a glass, steady, rising, finding every corner. It was not optimized. It was not efficient. It wavered and bent and climbed, and there was a note near the middle that cracked slightly, a human imperfection that no Sorvani crystal tone would ever produce. And that crack was the most beautiful thing Seni had heard in 400 years of listening. The piece lasted 4 minutes. Nobody spoke during it. Nobody spoke for 11 seconds after. The vote did not change. 5 in favor, 1 abstention. Protocol Keth-9 was recommended to the High Conclave. Seni's abstention was entered into the official record. It would follow her for the rest of her career. It would be cited in 6 future proceedings. It would become in the Vreth archives the first entry under a category that had never existed before. Unresolved dissent, emotional basis, no precedent found. She didn't know that yet. She only knew that the cello was still echoing in her auditory processors 3 hours later, and that her fourth hand had stopped tracing circles and was now perfectly still, as if it had finally found what it was looking for. On the Conclave homeworld, the Keth-9 authorization was ratified within a week. A Torrigan battle fleet began mobilizing. 400 warships, enough force to crack a planet's surface like an egg. On Perimeter Station 9, Torek Vasson received his deployment orders. He was to prepare the perimeter for a full species-level intervention. He opened his desk drawer from old habit. Confiscated during a routine sweep 2 months ago. He hadn't fought it. He hadn't filed a complaint. He'd just closed the drawer and gone back to work. He opened it now and looked at the empty space where 7 data chips had been. Wood and gut, making sounds his people never imagined. Gone. He closed the drawer. Admiral Cole Terran ate a ration bar as her fleet folded into the Sol system, because she had learned a long time ago that you eat when you can, not when you're hungry. The bar tasted like calcium and regret. Standard military issue. She chewed it and watched 400 warships blink into existence around her flagship, the Burning Doctrine, each one settling into formation with the precision of a species that had been building war machines for longer than most civilizations had existed. She was 300 years old. She had commanded fleets since before the humans had invented their internet. She had executed Protocol Keth-9 twice, once against the Pelori, who had surrendered their technology with the quiet acceptance of a species that understood the math, and once against the Drexi, who had not surrendered, and who were now 12 lines in a Vreth archive and a faint radioactive signature in the dust of what used to be their homeworld. Terran was not cruel. She did not enjoy what she did. She also did not lose sleep over it, because sleep was a resource and guilt was not. She was the blade the Conclave kept sharpened for moments exactly like this one, a species reaching beyond its permitted ceiling, threatening the stability that had kept the galaxy intact for 12,000 years. The Keth had not been stopped in time. They had torn a hole in space-time and erased themselves and 3 neighboring systems. The light from that erasure was still visible in certain parts of the galaxy, a scar that moved at the speed of photons and would never fully heal. Terran existed so that it would never happen again. The Sol system was small: 1 star, 8 planets, a handful of moons with pretensions. On the 3rd planet from the star, 7 billion humans went about their lives, and somewhere among them, in their universities and their garages and their competition laboratories, they were building things that scared the oldest civilization in the galaxy badly enough to send 400 warships. Terran finished her ration bar. She folded the wrapper precisely. She placed it in the disposal unit. "Open broadcast," she said. "All human-monitored frequencies." A light turned green. Terran spoke in trade standard, the lingua franca of the conclave, knowing that every human monitoring station, embassy, and satellite would be translating her words in real time. "Attention, Sol System. This is Admiral Call Terran of the Torrigan 3rd Fleet, operating under Conclave Protocol Keth 9 authorization. Your species has been identified as an uncontrolled innovation risk. You are hereby ordered to surrender all technology above Tier 7 classification threshold, submit to permanent research monitoring, and accept cognitive limitation protocols as determined by the Conclave of Elder Species. You have 1 standard rotation to comply. Non-compliance will result in enforcement action. Terran out." She cut the broadcast. She sat down. She waited. She expected the standard responses: panic, negotiation, threats that meant nothing. Perhaps, if the humans were smarter than the Drexy, quiet compliance. 11 minutes passed. 11 minutes was not enough time to organize a government response. It was not enough time to convene a military council. It was barely enough time to read the terms, translate them, and distribute them to relevant authorities. It was apparently enough time for the humans. The response came on all frequencies, every single one. Not a voice transmission, a data package. The communications officer opened it, scanned it, and went pale, which for a Torrigan, whose skin was the color of volcanic rock, meant going from dark gray to something closer to ash. "Admiral, it's a technical schematic." "Of what?" The officer didn't answer. He forwarded it to the flagship science division. Terran waited. She was patient. Patience was a professional requirement when your job involved the potential annihilation of entire species. 4 hours later, the chief science officer entered the bridge. Her name was Porath. She was young for a Sorvani, barely 600, and she had the crystalline complexion of someone who had not slept in 4 hours, and whose body was converting that stress into visible fracture lines across her surface. "Admiral. Report." "It's a stellar ignition device." Terran blinked. "Once." "Explain." "The schematic describes a mechanism for triggering premature nova in any main sequence star. Not our star, not their star, any star. The mathematics are—" Porath paused. Her fracture lines deepened. "The mathematics are correct. I've checked them 4 times. So has every analyst on this ship." "They've built this device?" "No. They've shown us they can. The schematic is complete. They sent us the blueprint for a weapon that could kill any sun in the galaxy, and they sent it in 11 minutes. Terran sat very still. 400 warships. Enough firepower to crack Earth's crust like an eggshell. The greatest concentration of military force the Conclave had deployed in 2,000 years. And the humans had responded by pointing a knife at every star in the sky and saying, "We can do this, and you know it. And now what?" The data package included a text message, translated into all 11 Conclave trade languages. Simple, short. Terran read it and felt something she had not felt in 200 years of military command. "We would rather not. Would you?" 7 words. The most dangerous 7 words in the history of the galaxy. Terran understood in the space between one breath and the next that the Conclave's entire model of power had just become obsolete. For 12,000 years, the model was simple. Power was tonnage, fleet size, destructive capacity. You demonstrated that you could break things, and the other side calculated whether they could survive the breaking, and the math always favored the bigger number. Humans did not calculate that way. They had no fleet, no shields worth anything, no army that could stand for 10 minutes against a Turigan ground force. They were, by every metric the Conclave measured, helpless. And they had looked at 400 warships aimed at their only planet, and built a device that made fleet size irrelevant. Not a wall, a knife. Not a bigger knife than Terran's. A different kind of knife. One that cut things the Conclave didn't even know could be cut. Tonnage versus leverage. Terran had commanded the most powerful fleet in the galaxy for 60 years, and a species that still used chemical rockets as a backup system had just made her obsolete in 11 minutes. She stood. Her bridge crew watched her. 200 officers, waiting for the order. Fire, retreat, negotiate. She gave none of those orders. Hold position, she said. All ships, weapons cold, no movement. She walked to the private communications terminal at the back of the bridge. She opened a channel to the High Conclave, encrypted, direct, the kind of channel that existed for moments when the normal chain of command was too slow or too fragile for what needed to be said. This is Admiral Terran. I require revised orders, Conclave. In Turigan military culture, an admiral did not request revised orders. An admiral executed the orders given. To request revision was to say, in the quietest possible voice, that the orders were wrong, and that the person who gave them did not understand the situation they had sent 400 warships into. It was the closest thing to screaming that Turigan military protocol allowed. The Conclave did not respond for 6 hours. Terran waited. Her fleet waited. The human planet turned below them, small and blue and wet, its cities glittering at night like scattered embers. Somewhere on that planet, in a university laboratory that smelled like burnt coffee and ozone, a girl named May Tan Voss sat on the floor with her back against a wall and watched the fleet on a telescope feed displayed on a cracked tablet screen. She had designed the stellar ignition schematic. Not alone. There had been a team, a frantic 72 hours of work when the fleet's approach was first detected. But the core insight was hers, the mathematical trick that made it work, the thing that turned the theoretical curiosity into a weapon that could kill suns. Her hands were shaking. They had been shaking for 11 minutes. No, longer, since she finished the schematic and understood what she had made. Her professor, an old man with kind eyes and a coffee stain on his shirt that had been there so long it had its own coffee stain, sat down next to her. He handed her a glass of water. She held it with both hands to keep it from spilling. "You did good, kid," he said. May looked at the fleet on her screen. 400 warships. She had stopped them with math and a message that was 7 words long. She did not feel like she did good. She leaned over the wastebasket beside her desk and threw up. Her professor held her hair back and said nothing, because there was nothing to say to a 20-year-old girl who had just held a gun to every star in the sky and asked an empire to blink. The empire blinked. May did not stop shaking. The Conclave did what ancient bureaucracies always do when reality stops following the rules. They formed a committee. They called it the Joint Species Consultation on Human Technological Ascendancy, which was 17 words that meant, "We don't know what to do, and we're hoping a long enough meeting will make the problem go away." The committee convened on Axis Meridian, a neutral station the size of a small city, that floated in the empty space between 3 trade routes, and served as the galaxy's most expensive waiting room. Sene Kauth was assigned as Vreth liaison. She accepted the assignment the way one accepts a diagnosis, with the understanding that arguing would change nothing, and that the condition was probably terminal. She arrived on Axis Meridian to find it already full. Delegations from every elder species, Sorvani science teams, Tarajan security details, administrative battalions hauling filing equipment through corridors designed for creatures half their width. And in the smallest, most poorly lit section of the station, the section normally used for storing cleaning supplies, the human delegation. There were 6 of them. Their lead diplomat was a woman named Carla Mendez, who had brown eyes, a warm smile, and the specific energy of someone who had been chosen for this job precisely because she looked like she couldn't hurt a fly. Sen recognized the strategy. Send the least threatening person. Make the Empire forget, for even a moment, that your species just pointed a sun killer at their fleet and said, "Would you rather not?" It was, Sen thought, a very human kind of weapon. Friendliness deployed with the precision of artillery. Among the 6 was May Tan Voss, technical consultant. She had grown in the months since the Sol standoff. Taller, sharper in the face, older around the eyes. She carried a bag everywhere that Sen eventually learned contained not weapons, not technology, but 3 notebooks, a broken stylus she kept forgetting to replace, and an emergency supply of chocolate that she guarded with the intensity of someone protecting state secrets. The committee met daily. The sessions were formal, scripted, and almost entirely useless, because the real information was arriving not through diplomatic channels, but through the Sorvani monitoring network, which tracked human technological output the way a seismograph tracks tremors before an earthquake. The tremors were getting bigger. In the 3 months since the Sol standoff, human technology had not slowed down. It had accelerated. The Sorvani presented their findings to the committee in a closed session that began with 17 delegates and ended with 4, because the rest had left, not out of boredom, but out of something closer to vertigo. FTL communication without relay stations. The Conclave's entire communication infrastructure relied on a network of relay beacons that had taken 2,000 years to build. Humans had made it obsolete using something they called quantum entanglement cascading, which they had apparently figured out during a collaborative project between 12 universities competing for a prize that amounted to, in Conclave currency, the cost of a mid-range shuttle. Biological repair nanites, not theoretical, working, tested on human volunteers who had signed something called consent forms, and who described the experience as weird but fine. The nanites could reverse cellular aging. The Conclave's medical establishment had spent 6,000 years declaring this impossible. Humans had done it in a semester. And then the last item, the one that emptied the room. Dimensional folding. The Sorvani delegate said the words and then stopped speaking. The silence that followed was the loudest sound Sene had ever heard. Dimensional folding was what had killed the Keth. 11,000 years ago, the Keth had attempted to fold the fabric of spacetime and access adjacent dimensional planes. The fold had destabilized. The resulting rupture had erased the Keth and 3 star systems. The light from that rupture was still traveling through the galaxy. It was the reason the Conclave existed, the scar that had scared 1,000 species into agreeing that some technologies should never be touched. Humans were touching it. Not theoretically. They were building prototypes, early stage, unstable, dangerous, but real. They were walking toward the same cliff the Keth had walked off, and they were doing it with the confidence of a species that had looked at every warning sign in the galaxy and decided the signs applied to someone else. The committee did not know what to do with this information, so they did the second thing ancient bureaucracies do when the first committee fails. They formed a subcommittee. Sene stopped attending. Not officially. She simply began spending her committee hours in the human quarter instead, in the cramped section of Axis Meridian that smelled like coffee and recycled air and something sweet she couldn't identify. May Tan Voss was usually there. Not at meetings. Carla Mendez handled the diplomacy. May sat in the corner of the human common room. Notebooks open, stylus moving, building things in her head that the rest of the galaxy wasn't ready for. Their friendship, if that's what it was, began with coffee. "You want some?" May held up a cup. The liquid was black, steaming, and smelled like it could strip paint. Sene's compound eyes studied it from 6 angles. "Is it toxic?" "To you? Probably not. To my sleep schedule? Absolutely." Sene took the cup. She drank. The taste was somewhere between tree bark and ambition. Her exoskeleton registered a mild chemical alert that she dismissed. "This is terrible," Sene said. "Yeah." May almost smiled. "You'll want another one in an hour." She was right. They talked. Not about technology or diplomacy or the committee that was slowly collapsing under the weight of its own irrelevance. They talked about small things. May explained chocolate. Sene explained the Vreth archival system, which had categorized every known piece of information in the galaxy, and which May described as the most beautiful and heartbreaking thing I've ever heard. Which confused Sene until May explained, "You built a perfect record of everything that already exists. That's amazing. But doesn't it make you sad that you stopped there?" Sene did not answer. She drank her coffee. Her 4th hand traced a circle on her knee, the gesture she'd never catalogued. But the subterranean current was there between them, in the things May didn't say. The way she flinched when someone used the word weapon in conversation. The way she sometimes stopped eating mid-bite and stared at nothing, her eyes focused on a point 5 months and several light years away, where a fleet of 400 warships had aimed their guns at her planet, and she had aimed something worse back. The chocolate she hoarded wasn't indulgence. It was a grounding tool. When her hands started shaking, and they started shaking at least once a day, she broke off a piece and focused on the taste until the shaking stopped. She never said the words, "stellar ignition schematic." Not once. Sen never asked. Meanwhile, the Sorvani were doing what the Sorvani always did when confronted with something they didn't understand. They ran models, thousands of them, millions. They fed every piece of data they had on human cognition, human biology, human history into their crystal lattice arrays and asked one question. Why? Not how, why? Every elder species had plateaued. The Vreth, the Sorvani, the Torrigan, all of them had reached a point in their development where innovation slowed, then stopped, then settled into the long maintenance of what already existed. It was natural. The neural architecture of every known sentient species reached maximum complexity and then stabilized. Humans hadn't stabilized. The Sorvani models returned an answer that was presented to the committee in a session that Sen attended only because May asked her to. Human cognition was fundamentally unstable. Their neural architecture had never finished optimizing. Where every other species had reached a point of balance, a settled state where the brain worked efficiently and stopped restructuring, human brains kept restructuring, kept building new connections, kept tearing down old ones, and rebuilding them differently. Their creativity wasn't a gift, it was a symptom. A brain that never finished becoming what it was supposed to become, and so kept becoming something else instead. Endlessly, restlessly, without a ceiling. The Sorvani presenter, a crystal-skinned scientist whose voice had the musicality of wind through glass, delivered the conclusion. Humans will not plateau, they are not capable of it. Their neurology does not permit equilibrium. They will continue to innovate until they are stopped by external force, or until they reach a boundary that does not exist in any model we can construct. The room was silent. They are, the presenter added, the most beautiful and the most dangerous thing this galaxy has ever produced. May, sitting beside Sen, looked at her hands. They were shaking. That night, Torek Vassin, reassigned to Axis Meridian as a security officer, a position he had not requested and did not want, walked through the station's corridors until he found the human quarter. The humans had set up a public music terminal near the entrance, open to anyone. A small screen, with a simple interface, and a library of human music that contained, as far as Torek could tell, everything humans had ever recorded. He sat down. He put on the headphones, designed for human ears, comically small against his Taurigan skull. He searched for cello. He listened until the station lights shifted from night cycle blue to dawn cycle white. When Senna found him in the morning, he was still sitting there. Headphones around his neck, eyes open. His hands were resting in his lap, palms up. A Taurigan gesture used only at funerals, when the dead were given back to the sky. She didn't ask what he was mourning. She sat next to him and poured 2 cups of coffee from the thermos she now carried everywhere. He took one. He drank it. He said nothing. 2 weeks later, the committee issued its final finding. Humanity was to be reclassified. Not Tier 9 primitive, not Tier 1 advanced. A new designation, created for the first time in 12,000 years of conclave record-keeping. Tier 0. Uncontainable. Seni signed the document. Her first hand held the stylus. Her second held the coffee. Her third held the tablet steady. Her fourth was perfectly still. 2 years changed everything and nothing. The stars were the same. The trade routes still ran. The conclave still met in its ancient chambers on its ancient homeworld. And the Vreth still filed documents. And the Taurican still maintained their fleets. And the Sorvani still ran their models. The architecture of 12,000 years of galactic civilization stood exactly where it had always stood. It just didn't matter anymore. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. That was the part that bothered the elder species the most, because conquest was something they understood, something they had protocols for, defenses against, history with. You could fight a conqueror. You could negotiate with an invader. You could, if necessary, destroy a threat. You could not fight a species that had simply stopped needing you. In 2 years, human technology had crossed every line the conclave had drawn in 12 millennia of careful, fearful governance. Stable dimensional folding, the thing that had killed the Keth, solved. The humans had cracked the instability problem using an approach so clumsy, so brute force, so offensively inelegant, that the Sorvani Science Council released a formal statement calling it an insult to mathematical rigor that nonetheless functions flawlessly. The humans framed that statement and hung it in the lab where the breakthrough had happened. They thought it was funny. Post-scarcity energy. Every human on Earth now had access to more power than most conclave worlds consumed in a year. They used it to do everything. Build, heal, explore, argue about which way to explore. They had not become unified or peaceful or wise. They had become more human, louder, messier, more generous, more reckless, more alive. And then, the threshold engine. Maytan Voss built it. Not alone. Never alone. She insisted on that, though the core architecture was hers and everyone who worked on it knew this, and she knew they knew, and the knowing sat on her shoulders like a coat made of gravity. The threshold engine did not fold space. It did not create wormholes. It opened a door, a stable, traversable passage to adjacent dimensional planes, places that were not the galaxy, places that were not anything the conclave had ever mapped or modeled or imagined, a door to somewhere else entirely. The conclave fractured. It did not shatter. 12,000 years of institutional inertia is a powerful adhesive, but it cracked along lines that had been invisible for millennia. The Vreth debated. The Sorvani modeled. The Taurigan, who understood the galaxy in terms of things you could hit, found themselves facing a situation where hitting was not just useless, but meaningless, like punching the ocean to stop the tide. Some species wanted alliance. They sent delegations to Earth, carrying gifts and proposals, and the desperate energy of civilizations that could feel themselves becoming irrelevant in real time. Some wanted war. They knew they would lose. They wanted it anyway, because war was familiar, and the alternative was something without a name. And some, a growing, quiet number, wanted to follow, through the door, into whatever was on the other side, which was its own kind of surrender, though they did not call it that. Admiral Cole Terran received her final orders on a morning that felt like every other morning, which was how she knew something fundamental had broken. Assemble a coalition fleet. Proceed to the Threshold Engine's location in high Earth orbit. Blockade it. Not to attack, the Conclave had learned that lesson, but to prevent passage. If humanity could not be stopped from building the door, perhaps they could be stopped from walking through it. Because if they walked through, and found what was on the other side, the galactic ascendancy would become a footnote. Not destroyed, not conquered, just no longer the story. A chapter in something larger. A room in a house that now had a door to a country. Terran assembled her fleet. Reduced now. 200 ships, not 400. Some had been reassigned. Some had been quietly decommissioned by species that no longer saw the point. She led them to Earth orbit and took position around the Threshold Engine, a structure that looked less like a weapon or a machine, and more like a cathedral built by someone who dreamed in mathematics. It hung in space above the blue planet, silver and strange, humming with a frequency that every species present felt differently. The Torrigan felt it in their bones. The Sorvani felt it in their crystal lattice. The Vreth felt it in the space between their thoughts, in the place where new categories waited to be made. Terran looked at it and felt nothing she was willing to name. Torek Vassin was already there, not on a warship, not in uniform. He had resigned his commission 4 months ago, submitted the paperwork with the same quiet precision he had once used to catalog contraband hot sauce, and booked passage on a civilian transport to Earth. He was the first non-human to formally request passage through the Threshold Engine. The humans had said yes. They hadn't even hesitated. They'd added his name to the manifest of the first ship scheduled to make the crossing. The duct tape diplomacy, refitted for the 3rd time, still ugly, still bolted together, still bearing a name that made Torigen linguists wince. Torek stood in the observation lounge of Axis Meridian's Earth Orbit Annex and watched Theron's fleet settle into blockade formation around the engine. He watched it, the way he used to watch sunsets on Perimeter Station 9, with the patience of someone who had learned that some things take exactly as long as they take. On Axis Meridian, Seni Kauth was packing. Not much to pack. Vreth traveled light. Their exoskeleton served as clothing, shelter, and portable filing system. But she had accumulated things during her time among humans. 3 coffee thermoses of increasing size, a notebook May had given her, filled with sketches of machines Sen couldn't understand, and margins filled with doodles of cats that Sen understood perfectly. A data chip, scratched and battered, containing a cello suite. The Vreth had voted, as a species, the first species-wide vote in 8,000 years. The motion was simple. Request formal integration into the emerging human technological framework. Abandon the archive as the Vreth's sole purpose. Begin for the first time in 8 millennia to create rather than merely record. The vote passed by a margin so large that the Vreth archivists had to create a new statistical category to describe it. They filed it under consensus, unprecedented, possibly emotional in nature. Sen had voted yes. She had not hesitated. Her 4th hand had been perfectly still. On the duct tape diplomacy, May Tan Voss stood at the Threshold Engine's control interface. Her hair was shorter now, cut close in a way that made her look both younger and older at the same time. Her notebooks were in her bag. Her chocolate supply was full. Her hands were shaking. They had been shaking, on and off, for 2 years. She had designed a weapon that stopped a war. She had designed a door that might end an empire. She had done these things because she could, because someone asked, because the math was there and her brain, her beautiful, unstable, never-finished human brain, could not stop reaching for the next thing. She hadn't slept more than 4 hours at a stretch in 6 months. She dreamed in equations. She woke up with solutions to problems she hadn't consciously been working on. She was tired. She was terrified. She was incandescent with the need to see what was on the other side of the door she had built. All of these things were true at the same time. She had stopped expecting them to resolve into something simpler. The duct tape diplomacy powered up its engines. Captain Reyes, the same short woman with the gravity-losing hairknot, promoted 3 times since the perimeter inspection that started all of this, plotted a course for the threshold engine. Terran's fleet surrounded the engine, 200 warships. The blockade was perfect. The formation was textbook. Every gun was aimed, every shield was raised. The duct tape diplomacy approached on a straight line. No evasive maneuvers, no weapons charged. It flew toward the blockade the way it did everything, blunt, ugly, and absolutely certain. Terran watched it on her bridge display. A single ship, bolted together, spray-painted seams, a name that was a joke about impermanence. It moved through her blockade's outer perimeter, and her weapons officers looked at her, and her tactical officers looked at her, and 200 warships waited for the word. She opened a channel, not to the Conclave, not to her fleet, to the duct tape diplomacy. Human vessel, this is Admiral Terran of the Torrigan Third Fleet. A pause, static. Then Captain Reyes' voice, steady and small and human. Admiral Terran, we read you. What you are about to do cannot be undone. A longer pause. Terran heard someone in the background of the human bridge, a low voice, calm, possibly laughing. Then Reyes again. Admiral, nothing we've ever done could be undone. That's sort of our whole thing. Terran closed the channel. She stood on her bridge, 300 years old, 2 Protocol Keth-9 executions, 60 years of fleet command. The blade the Conclave had built to keep the galaxy from tearing itself open. She looked at the duct tape diplomacy on her screen. Ugly, impermanent, held together by stubbornness and spray paint. She looked at her fleet, her guns, her shields. 12,000 years of empire behind her, and a door in front of her, and a species that could not stop walking forward no matter what stood in the way. She gave the order. All ships, stand down, clear the lane. 200 warships powered down their weapons. Formation broke. The blockade opened like a jaw unhinging. The lane to the threshold engine stretched empty and clear, and the duct tape diplomacy flew through it without slowing down. May activated the engine from the ship's linked console. The threshold opened. It did not open with light. It did not open with sound. It opened with something that every species present would later describe differently, because it touched a part of the brain that language hadn't mapped yet. The Torrigan aboard Terran's fleet said it was like the sound a mountain makes when it decides to walk. The Vreth archivists on Axis Meridian said it was like hearing the first new word in a dead language. The Sarvani said their crystal lattices resonated at a frequency that didn't exist in their models. The humans, on the duct tape diplomacy, didn't describe it at all. They were too busy checking readings and arguing about naming conventions for whatever was on the other side. Torek Vasine stood at the observation window as the ship crossed the threshold. He carried nothing. No data chips, no uniform, no rank. He pressed his palm against the glass, a gesture that meant nothing in Torrigan culture, borrowed from the humans, meaning everything, and watched the galaxy he'd known for 3 centuries fold away behind him like a page being turned. On Axis Meridian, Seni watched the fold close on her display. The threshold shimmered, stabilized, held. A door, standing open, waiting. She poured 2 cups of coffee, one for herself, one for the empty chair where May had sat yesterday before she shipped out. Senny placed the cup on the table in front of the empty chair and wrapped all 4 hands around her own cup. She drank. It was still terrible. She would have another in an hour. In high Earth orbit, Admiral Terran watched the threshold from her bridge. The duct-tape diplomacy was gone. Through, wherever through was. The engine still hummed. The door was still open. The stars looked the same. The fleet looked the same. Earth turned below, blue and stubborn and noisy. Everything looked the same. Nothing would ever be the same. Terran opened a channel to the conclave. Her final report. In 12,000 years of Torrigan military service, no admiral had ever editorialized in an official communication. Reports were facts, data. The blade does not have opinions. Terran looked at the open door in space, humming with a sound that didn't have a name, leading to a place that didn't have a map. Her report was 3 words. They went through. The conclave received the report. They filed it. They debated it. They formed a committee to discuss the implications, and a subcommittee to discuss the committee. And one by one, across the following months and years, the ships began to come. Not warships, not diplomats, just ships. Sorvani research vessels, and Vreth archival transports, and Torrigan civilian cruisers, and vessels from species that had never left their home systems before. They came to Earth orbit. They came to the threshold. They came to the door. Because the humans had done what humans always did. The impossible, the inelegant, the offensive to mathematical rigor thing that nonetheless worked. And then they had left the door open.